Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And welcome once again. Very special welcome to all of Jason's family and friends who are with us, as well as Adam and Adrian's family who are with us. As you see, our numbers are down a little bit, and that's because the snowbirds have flown to places up north. I'm sure many of them are with us on live stream this morning or Zoom, and so we welcome you, but we miss your presence. And maybe everyone who comes regularly can ask a neighbor or a friend to come with them next Shabbat. Well, I just finished watching a Netflix series which grabbed me from the moment I read about it before I even put it on. The name of the series is Rough Diamonds. How many of you saw it? Yeah. See, a lot of you did. So why did it grab me? It grabbed me because the Times of Israel referred to it as Shtisel meets the Godfather. What could possibly be wrong, right, with a series, Shtisel meets the Godfather? It's also attractive because I know it lets us into the Hasidic community. In this case, it was in Antwerp. And the truth is, we have a lot of feelings about the Hasidic world, but we all share a certain fascination with how they live their lives and what goes on inside their community, such as the nature of closed communities that stay a bit removed from those of us who live in open communities. Because from outside it does look so reverential, so religious, so meaningful, so filled with value. But in this particular series, something else is revealed. This family that's involved in the diamond industry in Antwerp. And what's revealed is a certain level of hypocrisy. We see criminality in the family and truly distorted values. Now there is hypocrisy and criminality and distorted values amongst all people, but this reveals something else because of what seems to be such an extreme difference between the outer appearance and the inner reality. And I'm going to shift now. I'm going to get back to Rough Diamonds a little bit later. But as I was thinking about aspects of this morning's Kriyah, the Torah readings, as well as the Haftorah, I realized that there's something in that, in the appearance of religiosity with ritual and meaning which lies underneath it all, that became pretty challenging to me when reading Acharei Mot Kedoshim in the Haftorah from Amos. I want to tell you, and I couldn't stand here if I couldn't tell you this, I think there's such great things about our tradition. And I believe that one of the most significant, important, and appealing aspects of Judaism is in its integration of the past, the present, and the future. And so though I referenced it as a tradition, we learn the great teachings of our tradition and the rituals of our tradition. We know that they're not just about the past, as tradition seems to evoke, but rather it's about our lives in the present and about the future. For what we learn from our tradition is that our understandings are not static, that we evolve, that we change. We know that as individuals, but when you think about the Torah reading this morning and the ritual response to sin, you realize that we're nothing like our ancestors were. And you are not here only because your parents came to shul, although that, as we see, is a great motivator. You're also here because of that which you can derive from being here in the moment, in terms of understanding and faith and the comfort you find in a community and in a sanctuary with the music and the words. And if you understand the growth of ritual, we may assume that the future is not going to be exactly like the present, is maybe hard to understand, but you've heard this and you know this, that there isn't one idea about anything amongst our people. We don't have dogma, we don't have a unified theology. We have a multiplicity of ideas, different ways of looking at things, lots of different ways that we learn and express what it means to be Jewish and even what it means to be religious. Different ways that we connect and different ways that we find and understand meaning. And lest you should say, there you go again, Rabbi, testing authority of the tradition, I would say to you, it's the tradition that stands against itself so often by giving us different ways to look at things and creating alternative ideas, alternative positions. So it can feel confusing, but I think as you sit back, you realize it can also be inspirational. So I place this idea in the following context. In the beginning of the Torah reading, Parshat Achrei Mot is a description of the rituals done by and brought to the priests in the temple to ask for forgiveness. Ritual is important for many reasons. Ritual roots us in our culture. It serves as a dramatic presentation that reenacts moments. Ritual helps transmit meaning. It serves as a vehicle from generation to generation. But wouldn't you say that there's also a downside to ritual? That we become so routinized in their doing, when we do them day after day, week after week, without change, we can lose a handle on what the meaning is that they're supposed to evoke, or how they're meant to stir our souls. And take Yom Kippur, for example. Our fasts become simply a response to what we're supposed to do. And the affliction of the hunger no longer connects us to the affliction of our souls, which we're commanded to do. And so it's easy, just by virtue of repetition, to lose the connection to the essential meaning. So there needs to be what we refer to in the contemporary spiritual world, mindfulness in the rituals that we do. Think about what we just did. We returned our Torah to the ark, and we heard a song sung by the cantor in the choir, and we joined in. The ritual reminds us of the most profound moment of our people, standing at Sinai. And the ritual reminds us of the most important writings of our people that tie us to the place. And so we put the Torah in the Holy Ark. We refer to it as Eitz Chaim. Eitz Chaim, a living tree, a material object that lives in our lives. We did something that either we or our parents have done for years and years and years, and connects us to generations going all the way back to Sinai. We recognize that which is holy. How much of that did we feel? And by the way, I do think our singing of Eitz Chaim stands out above all rituals in terms of how much and how powerfully we feel it. But we have to remind ourselves about it. Most of our communal rituals are predetermined. With most of our communal rituals, we don't have a choice. Like the ancient temple, there were leaders, priests, and they controlled it all. They levied the taxes. They determined who was an insider, who was a participant, and who was an outsider. And so ritual can be so powerful, but can also take away from the individual expression and from communal authority. And I believe that this tension in ritual is one of the most important lessons in the fact that Achrei Mot, which is all about holiness and the efficacy of ritual, is balanced by the next parsha, which is Kedoshim. You have to read it this afternoon because we won't read it again this year. And in Kedoshim, we see that holiness is found in a very different place. Not in the temple, but it's found in our behaviors. It's found in our capacity to be responsible human beings. It's one of the truly beautiful aspects of living a Jewish life. Because Judaism isn't just what's about here in the synagogue. It's not about just the sanctuary. It's about the way you treat your wife and your husband and your children and your parents. It's about how you use your time. It's about taking care of underserved populations and people who are less fortunate. So look at the beginning of Kedoshim and where our holiness resides. But then the tradition brings us even deeper into an extreme, as it tells us, an extreme reading. And this comes then from a prophet. His name was Amos. And here we see a great religious figure who's been kept alive by our teachers, by our rabbis, and our communal leaders in our congregations for thousands of years. And this Haftarah then turns the responsibilities and the work of the priest and communal leaders on its head. And this is what I meant when I began to speak about different ways of being and believing and understanding and living as a Jew. It is in this incredible contrast between the priest as a religious leader of ritual and the prophet as a religious voice. It's in that space that we sit this morning. And we need to figure it out. What really matters? How do we live our religious lives? I saw this question in a few ways this week. One had to do with an interview I saw with some young evangelical Christians who are wondering how they lost their way in today's political climate and today's political conversation. The way is a way that shows a concern for honesty and truth, for respect of all human beings and women, concern for the damage, the violence against our children being brought by guns, and understanding that all human beings are deserving of respect. And these young evangelicals are asking an important question. They're looking at the world in a different light than what their leaders had been telling them over the last decade or two. And they're looking for what they believe to be a different and an essential truth. And then yesterday I read David Brooks's op-ed piece in the New York Times about the soul of a nation and the soul of a political leader. And Brooks affirmed that to have a soul, one must be in pursuit of truth. One must be able to show empathy and know that there are truths beyond power and control. The soul is a religious concept, but Brooks was speaking about how the soul comes from God, but impacts all decisions, not just religion. And if the decisions and the words spoken are contrary to goodness and decency, if they aren't concerned centrally with morality, then the soul leaves the world. Amos, today's prophet, spoke these words that you've heard from great leaders, transformational leaders. He said, "Let justice well up like water, righteousness like a mighty stream." Amos changed the direction of the religious discourse in his time. I'm not sure if he had a lot of followers, but what I find extraordinary is that we're reading his words 2,800 years after he said them and after they were written down. He's one of 12 what are referred to as minor prophets. He prophesied from about the years 775 to 750 BCE. He came from a town called Tekoa. It's about 12 miles south of Yerushalayim. It exists today. During his time as a prophet, the kingdom of Israel had expanded and had taken control over the trade routes which crisscross Israel. A new class of the rich and wealthy took shape in Israel in this 8th century BCE. And the gap between the haves and the have-nots, the rich and the poor, grew. The poor didn't share in the new riches of Israel. And he charged the priests with corruption on the grounds that they encouraged the wealthy to bring elaborate gifts to the temple for God. And so wealth and religion became unexplainably tied to each other, and Amos is bothered. He accused the wealthy of exploiting the poor, for while the rich claim to honor God with lavish sacrifices, they don't give. They don't give to the underserved. And many of the debtors are sold off as slaves. And Amos prophesied that the temple would be destroyed if the Israelites continued to be unjust. The shrines of Isaac shall be laid waste, he said, and the sanctuaries of Israel will be reduced to ruin. Amos was committed to justice for all people, rich and poor. But let justice well up like water, righteousness like a mighty stream, he said. He lived during the first period in Israelite history where a society with sharp class divisions emerged. And he was enraged by the fact that people believed that affluence was a blessing from God. And the priests encouraged those classes to bring their gifts to the temple. So he clashed with power. He clashed with the priests, and he was angered with the idea that sacrifices were more important to God than helping the poor. The neglect of people and God's creatures is far worse than the neglect of the Creator, he said. Ironically, the priest argued that even if they were to take all the gold and silver from the temple, and if they were given to the poor, it would have no effect in the long run. The Bible itself tells us, they said, there will always be poor in the land. So he saw the perversion of religion. He saw the perversion of our Torah. And although the high priest at that time, Amaziah, tried to exile Amos, Amos continued with great courage to deliver his message to the people. And he accused leaders of exploiting the powerless. He showed their dishonesty. He was deeply disturbed by the sexual decadence of his time. God, he taught, is concerned with the righteousness of people, and he's angered by ethical transgression. He knew that they were in a position to help those who were suffering, and he saw that the priests were only catering to the top 2%. Incredibly, these words of 3,800 years ago remain alive today, and his message is as much ours to behold as is the message of our rituals for Yom Kippur. Amos realized that unless the nation straightened out its priorities, even if it had the mightiest army, it couldn't be saved from destruction. And that was his prophecy. Ultimately, Amos was a man who, to quote John Lewis, was not afraid to make good trouble. He insisted that justice is the most important value, and to be part of a chosen people imposes additional obligations. It doesn't give you superior rights. It's not for more ritualized behavior, but rather it's about the contribution to humanity. He reminded us that we're not superior to anyone. And as you saw in the beginning of the Haftorah, he references the Ethiopians. What makes us special, he said, is our commitment to helping humanity. He said what makes us special is the work of justice. And because we have had Amos's words as part of our tradition for nearly 2,800 years, and because we read them over and over and over again, that message is integrated into our lives, realizing how important it is to balance ritual and morality, justice, ethics, and love. in wherever we are and in our places of worship. So if you haven't seen Rough Diamonds, do so. And think about the role of ritual and the roles of the priest. That final scene in the 8-part series of that community sitting on Yom Kippur saying, it's not going to give it away. It happens every single year. Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu. And how powerful that was. Much more powerful than I can make it here or the cantor can here. Liturgy and meaning. We cannot speak about it. We cannot stop speaking about how our ritual is to make us better human beings. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.